Welcome to episode 48 of Rubbish Talk with myself, Alasdair.
And myself, Jane Bond.
And this week our guest is Jennifer Carfrae, who is Senior Lecturer at SRUC, Scottish Rural. I don't even know what it stands for. We gave her a hard time as well in the episode. She used the acronym.
Is it Scottish Rural University College?
Something like that. We'll work it out. There we go. That was a good start, wasn't it? For people that are new to the podcast, we've just done an excellent introduction. What we try and do in this podcast is try and talk to experts in the industry about the diversity of the sector and how complicated the sector is. So I think that probably leads into the first item you've got, Jane, that we're wanting to talk about, the BBC report about incineration.
Yeah, well, I just was looking at this, and the BBC have found that burning household rubbish and giant incinerators to make electricity is now the dirtiest way the UK generates power, which, I kind of think is a bit, unless, I mean, we haven't got coal anymore. So what are they trying to do? Pick on the next one? So it's saying nearly half of the rubbish produced in UK homes, including increasing amounts of plastics, now incinerated. Scientists warn it is a disaster for the climate, and some are calling for a ban on new incinerators. It's not just incinerating, though, it's energy from waste as well. So I'm getting rid of rubbish. I think the industry's not too chuffed about it, are they, Alasdair?
Yeah, in fairness to the Environment Services Association, I think it was Jacob that was on. He had, I thought it was a quite good interview actually, where he sort of highlighted. So I think the bit it's actually been quite interesting with some of the sort of LinkedIn social media stuff, and it's been quite interesting. You very much had two camps saying incineration's dreadful, it's horrible, it's causing air pollution, it's this, that, and everything. And then the other side is saying, well, we've got all this waste, we need to deal with it. We no longer want to put it in the landfill. What's our other option? And when it comes down to it, if the public aren't going to engage properly in recycling, and using Scotland figures, less than 20% of people in Scotland use their food waste recycling, so that makes 30% of residual waste is burnt. We're going to need to either incinerate or landfill stuff. So, at the end of the day, we can't have everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to go somewhere, hasn't it? I mean,
we've got to deal with the waste.
We can't recycle everything, even though we're trying.
Yeah. And I keep going back to, my days when I ran landfill sites. I ran 2 landfill sites, and we were taking 500,000 tons of waste a year into these sites. And until you've stood at a gate and watched the stuff come in day after day after day, do you realise? And I think that's quite often the people that do make comment about, not using incineration or, using recycling or circular economy and this and that, have probably never sat at a gate watching the amount of stuff that flows in day after day after day, and it doesn't stop.
And they've probably never done waste composition analysis either to identify what people throw away and what they could recycle if they put a bit of effort into it.
Yeah. So, no, it was interesting. I did have to. I did end up getting involved in a bit of a LinkedIn debate with a professor of Cambridge University, actually. But I need to go back and see where the debate ended, because it was one of these ones which just like, I kept replying, she kept replying, and it was just like, we should maybe just have a phone call and discuss this. It wasn't a particular argument. It was just like, it was just a bit, yeah.
So what was her take on it?
Well, I think her take was that the recycling service offered by the councils was pretty poor. And my argument back to her was that, yes, there are issues with the recycling provided by councils, but if the public aren't going to engage properly with it and do what they're meant to do, then, we're going to end up all the time with a large quantity of residual waste that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, you can lead a horse to water, but
Absolutely.
You can't make it put its recycling in the proper bins.
You've got, in Scotland, we've got the landfill ban coming out at the end of 2025, and they reckon there's going to be an 800,000 tonne lack of capacity for 2026. So there's not going to be a home for 800,000 tonnes of waste. because it can't go to landfill and there's not enough incineration capacity.
And I think the thing is as well, it's like, how much can you recycle? Because we were talking the other week, weren't we, about the plastic bags that are going into supermarkets, and the fact that they were going into plastic bags, trackers were in there, and then they were going into an incinerator rather than recycling. Whether that's because of a lack of recycling facilities to take these plastic bags to, or what. But if you don't have the infrastructure in terms of the recycling facilities and the processing, then market forces drive
you
things.
can't do it.
They're
No,
only
absolutely.
it's economic.
I've been doing the research for this. We've talked about before the Resource in Scotland conference, and I've been ploughing through the data in terms of trying to work out the things. And the actual, particularly in Scotland, the amount of capacity we have for actually recycled material is tiny. And the vast majority of it gets exported, to England or exported Europe or further afield. And we're not actually doing the recycling in the country. And there are valid arguments why we don't do it, but at the end of the day, if we don't do it, we make it much harder for ourselves to actually recycle in the first place. So, it was quite interesting, whether it's calmed down or not. There is actually a really interesting thing that and I think this is true, and somebody can phone in and check us if it's not true, but because incineration generates electricity, that electricity is viewed as carbon emissions from the power sector rather than carbon emissions from the waste sector.
Oh, okay.
So the waste sector can quite rightly say our carbon emissions are reducing, but that's because a whole chunk of them have actually gone into the waste industry calculations. So I believe that is actually correct, and so I can understand why people have a bit of criticism against it. But my view of it is just down to this: we produce a hell of a lot of waste, and if we're not going to incinerate it, what we're going to do with it, we're going to landfill it. We're better to incinerate it, control the emissions, generate electricity, get electricity, and as the Environment Services Association said, they've got plans for carbon capture for some of the facilities where they'll be capturing the carbon. And some of the facilities, the big bonus with incineration is if you can get use of the waste heat as well.
And we've been that's where the efficiency is.
Yeah, we've been pretty poor at that in the UK, but if you go to Europe, a lot of the heating is done by district heating schemes. In fact, Shetland has got a district heating scheme.
That's always held up as one of the better ones. The good efficiency ones as well, high efficiency ones.
Go. So if you want to find out more about that, just Google BBC about the dirtiest form of power, and you'll find lots of information about it.
Yeah, I kind of think I missed it all because I was on holiday last week.
You did again, Jane.
Well, I have to recharge the batteries, and the weather was so rubbish here. I was in Crete, hot, nice, warm, sunny. Anyway, so the other one was kind of linking into that is that they've confirmed, or the Circular Economy Minister has confirmed that glass will not be in scope material for England and Northern Ireland's DRSs. So they've said they'll include PET, steel, aluminium cans, but not glass. And I think that was kind of, both Wales and Scotland are still keen on putting in glass there. So I don't quite know what's going to happen there.
Who is the Circular Economy Minister? Mary Freer.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So, well, I suppose it's a kind of watch this space, isn't it? Is Scotland still going to include the DRS?
Who knows? Well, I said that was the thing so in Scotland they were planning to include glass, weren't they?
Yeah,
So that'll be a contradiction in there.
Because it's still in terms of the Internal Market Act as well.
So I take it that decision only applies to England and Northern Ireland.
Well, it looks like it, yes.
Wales
and Scotland. Yeah, so we'll
Let's
see.
just make it as complicated as possible. Why don't we?
Oh no, let's make it even more
Just
complicated
yeah,
than normal.
yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, well, we'll watch that space and see what happens.
Did I tell you? Did we talk about this before? That my daughter has discovered a new earning opportunity.
Yes, you
Do you
did
remember
say
it?
about the plastic
About
bottles.
the little in Glasgow that does
Yeah.
they're using the ERS equipment to give the £5 return on the bottle. I think it's only Glasgow that's doing it, so it's only if you're in Glasgow you can take your plastic bottles back to Lidl and get £5 back. So
Well, my niece
I was
lives in in Ireland, Southern Ireland, and she has been collecting plastic bottles as well because they've got their DRS over there, the plastic bottles. She has a fortune apparently by collecting all these plastic bottles. It's like new career.
I've always said when it was planned to come in Scotland, you'd be better if you're running a recycling facility, you would be better just collecting all the bottles and putting them
Making your
into
money
the
that
ERS.
way.
Yeah, you know, it worked out. When you worked it out, it was a huge amount of money. If you were getting 20 pence a bottle or whatever, it was a vast amount of money.
Hmm.
Anyway, what's next? Oh, this is one I saw from Jenny Grant. So Jenny Grant from RIA, Renewable Energy Association, which looks after composting and anaerobic digestion, and she posted a link up about uh, the industry getting together. So one of my pet hates with food waste is when people put the banana skin in the bin and they leave the label on, because the label's generally plastic. The
Mhm.
plastic goes through the compost, the AD plant, and then that digestate will be applied to land. So basically, you're just putting plastic onto land. So it really annoys me that they put plastic stickers on fruit. I understand why they do it, because at checkout they need to know what the fruit is or whatever. But the industry is coming together to try and get a compostable produce sticker. And they think they're going to do it by 2025.
That'd be, you kind of think it's a sort of a no-brainer, isn't it, really? Yeah. If it's a plastic sticker that's causing the problems, then presumably put a compostable one in just makes sense.
Yeah, so there's fresh produce industry leaders met and created a framework for the adoption of a certified compostable sticker starting in 2025. There you go.
I've got here, it says standard action plan will be developed and launched by industry stakeholders before the end of 2024. So, they better get a move on it, haven't they, really? And then launched
Yeah.
in 2025.
It is
Excellent.
one of these daft ones, isn't it, that we
No.
stick a plastic sticker on something that they ain't going to compost. But so there you go.
Yeah.
So well done, Jenny Grant. For I think Jenny was there actually, so I'll need to catch up with Jenny and see if it was as an exciting a meeting as I think it might be.
Right, okay. The one that I've got next, which is again another no-brainer that you think everybody should get anyway, is South Ayrshire schools are all getting new bins to reflect home collections. So, you do in school what you do at home and you put them in the right bins, etc., which you kind of think would be a no-brainer. I mean, why wouldn't you do that?
Well, they've done that.
Yeah,
They've done that with the office waste as well, actually. So
yeah. And
again, the office waste we've got here is the same as the household waste. And you do think, why on earth did we not do that 20 years ago from introduced household waste recycling? But
yeah.
uh,
So they've got the green, which is non-recyclable waste, paper, card, and cardboard, and metals, plastics, and cartons. So they've got the different coloured bins. So that just makes sense, doesn't it? Really. So well done, South Ayrshire and South Ayrshire schools, and hopefully, all the other schools are, all the other authorities are exactly the same as well as what they do at home. Makes sense.
you've just reminded me of. I did subject myself to listening to Jeremy Vine about the incineration topic we were just talking about.
Oh right, uh-huh.
And the number of people phoning in, and one of the ladies phoned in. Sharan, it was a hairdresser, Sharan,
Uh-huh.
and she produced a lot of.
Hey,
Okay,
sure.
was it here? Was it here? She ran a small business basically and produced a lot of food waste somehow. It wouldn't have been a hairdresser food waste,
Well, hey,
I don't think. But whatever, she could not get a commercial collection for food waste, and it was just like why not? Just go and get like Keenan or somebody to come and do it. It's just like, and I'm sure it's probably because our service was provided through the council, and the council just didn't do a food waste collection to them.
Well, they did do
But
food waste down in England.
well, that was the thing. I think they did a household food waste collection, but quite often councils will have a separate that'll collect from households, and then a separate vehicles will collect from the commercials. So the two don't tie up. But that's the problem. People don't understand that difference, and they just think it's nonsense, which to a certain extent it is. And we seem to quite commonly do that sort of thing with waste, don't we? We just have these nonsense rules that don't make sense to the public. So sometimes there is a valid reason behind it. So I did manage to listen to it all, but I was shouting at the radio every so often.
You didn't ring up then.
Yeah, I was tempted because sometimes he was talking they were talking nonsense about stuff, and I was yeah. In fact, I think I did message me and suggest that she replied to certain things on social media on my behalf while I was away. So
because you're away as well, not just me.
yeah, I was running about the mountains and post-storm was this storm
Ashley or something?
Ashley.
Yeah. Oh well.
What
you needed, yeah, I was going to say what you needed was to be able to come back and, be able to sit in your tenement property in Glasgow where they've fitted electric wallpaper.
I see that. So how does that work?
I don't know.
I'm testing you, Jane.
Well, I don't know because there is that. There's a news item.
Is it like an electric blanket in your wall?
As part of a pilot scheme.
Disguised as
do you know, aimed at combating climate change? It just kind of seems slightly, well, I mean, it seems very interesting. How it combats climate change, I'm not sure.
I suppose it's like the seemingly the underfloor heating's meant to be really efficient, but the challenge with that is sort of retrofitting it. So you could imagine if you had your walls lined with wallpaper, it's relatively easy to do. And that would be a more efficient way to heat the property.
I don't know, because there's not really very much on it here. It says the heating buildings are a major contributor to carbon emissions in Scotland, which we know, accounting for more than 36% of total emissions. That's quite a lot. The average Scottish home loses heat 3 times faster than homes in many European countries and gets central heating, which relies on fossil fuels as the most common heating system. Okay, thin metallic sheets, which are connected to the electricity supply that heat up solid objects in the room through infrared technology. Well, so that's getting a bit.
There you go. I think that sounds good.
AI-enabled data analytics. Oh my goodness.
Who all? University of Glasgow, University of Clyde, West of Scotland Housing Association, and Glasgow City Council. There you go. Good luck.
Oh yeah, I'm interested to see.
You got to try these things and research these things, don't you? So we'll put
electricity bill though. I mean,
especially if it's an old tenement property as well.
Yeah. Ah, interesting.
There you go. Oh, that sounds good. But as usual, we'll put the link up.
Well, if anybody knows anything more, then give us a shout because it sounds very interesting. Anyway, yes, we've got some news, and we're still looking, and we're looking for our guest introduction for our 50th episode, which is in a couple of episodes' time. And what we're looking for is a concise 60-second introduction to our Rubbish Talk podcast. So that's what we're looking for, and we're hoping that somebody is going to come up with something that beats Alasdair's introduction. We need something new.
That probably wouldn't be that hard. We could probably manage that easily. And for all the active people out there, before we go on to the active people, you mentioned I was on holiday, Jane. We went to try and find. I was up near Braemar, and it's an amazing story actually. So, rock climbing, used to be a very working class sport. So what they used to do was they came from Aberdeen, and then they'd walk out from Braemar to these cliffs to do their weekend climbing, whatever. But always the weather was crap and stuff, and the local lair didn't like them crossing the land, so they had to sort of sneak through in darkness. So what the climbers did was they built a secret house So Howth in Scotland is a wee shelter sort of thing. So this Howth is not well known. You'd probably struggle, even with Google, you'd probably struggle to find the coordinates of it. So we were stomping about in Storm Ashley trying to find this damn Howth for about an hour and a half. But
Very secret.
We did actually find it. We found it, and it was quite on a cold, wet winter's night. It'd be quite a nice wee shelter. Couldn't
That
quite
sounds
stand
good.
up in it, but it was nice.
Oh,
So
crikey, it
anyway,
was small then.
was that, yeah, it was. You could sort of almost stand up at you had to crawl at the door. Was only probably I had to crawl through, but I had to take my bag off and crawl through this wee access door.
Wow, that's really small.
Yeah. So, but if we can get organised, I can get Mia to put the picture up in the newsletter. I'll put some pictures. But we did actually. We made it so secret. We actually switched our watches off so that nobody could follow the. Because that's the danger. That's the danger now. You're always tracked. You're always tracked. So everybody can just look at your Strava and see where where you've gone. So we switched watches off. I must have switched my watch off 3 times actually. I'm back on 3 times. So if you look at my Strava post, it's all zigzaggy and thingy, but they'll not find it from the zigzags. So it was nowhere near the zigzags.
Don't get you totally lost. So anyway, about our Strava club, Alasdair.
Oh, the Strava Club. So we have a Rubbish Talk Strava Club, and one is to just try and share the podcast to people that might be looking for something different to listen to. But 2 is to try and encourage people to get out and be active. So for the month of November, we're going to do a 10 and 10 challenge. So starting off nice and easy. So
Yeah,
10
well,
minutes
I think even I can do 10 minutes.
Yep, 10 minutes of activity and at
Okay.
least 10 days of the month. You can do more if you like, but that's the challenge. And then we're going to gradually increase that to 15, 15, and so on. So if you're up for a wee challenge, you want some thingy, then we'll have that posted before this episode goes out. So if you're not joined yet, look for Rubbish Talk and Strava and you'll find us. The only bad bit about it is Strava have just changed the rules and don't allow any external links because our intention was to link to the podcast, but we can't do that.
Oh no. Oh,
You
that's a
need
bit
to,
annoying.
yeah, the banned external links for some reason. So you need to just look on social media for your user platforms. And while we're talking about user platforms, I think we went on Amazon Prime for some reason. We're now on that. So if there are other ones we're not on, then just drop us a note and let us know.
We're getting out there. We're hoping for a Guardian mention, aren't we? And like
any
James
newspaper
Piper, any newspaper will do.
or Jeremy Vine show. We could get on a Jeremy Vine show.
Yeah, so if anybody's got any ideas of how we can go viral, then just give us a shift.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got
And
something.
anyway, I've not talked about my podcast for ages because I think months and months and months ago I used to complain that my wireless podcast kept breaking and it was disposable IT just about.
Your earpods.
Since it was recycling week last week, I started to mention. So I've been working with one earpod for about 3 months now. I've just been making do with one, but I've just discovered my other my right earpod has started working again. So,
well,
all good news. So the moral of the story is don't put them into recycling for at least 4 months and just check that it just starts working again.
Well, I've got all these different types. You know, the ones where you used to sort of clip over your ears. There was ones that clipped over your ears, ones that were just like headphones and stuff like that, and ones that when you get on the bus when you go on these tours and they give you headphones and you have to plug it in and they tell you like all sorts of tourist things. I've got loads of those as well. So
you missed it was Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Recycling Day last week, Jane. Did you miss it?
I was on my holidays. I was sitting in the sun, shining great, not really bothering about anything else.
I'm sure we can arrange a collection if you've got some cables needing recycled. So there we go. So this week we interviewed Jennifer Carfrae, who, as I said at the start, is a senior lecturer in agriculture, horticulture, and engineering science, and program director, MSc Soils and Sustainability at SRUC. And they've also got a link in with Edinburgh University. So we had a great chat with Jennifer, didn't we?
Yeah, we did actually, because we do a bit of lecturing on our MSc course, don't we? Absolutely brilliant, love it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was good. It was good just to listen to. And I think we actually, if I remember right, we did record that episode quite a while ago actually. So my memory's fading me what we actually chatted about. But I think we talked about Chat GPT quite a bit, didn't we?
We did, yeah.
About the AI system and
Yeah.
how it's been used and how the universities are dealing with it. So that was
Uh-huh.
fascinating. So there you go. So over to myself and Jane and Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you? Welcome to Rubbish Talk.
Hello, thank you.
Hi,
It's good to see everybody.
hi Jennifer.
Yeah.
Hi, Alasdair. How are you?
Very well, very well.
So we've got a number of questions for you today, Jennifer. You know, we're going to go through our it's not mastermind honest, so we can have those discussions and we'll talk about how you got into the industry, what you're doing at the moment. You know, everything about you really.
Okay.
So first off, can you tell us a bit about who you work for and a bit of background about the organisation and what you do?
Sure. So I'm currently the Programme Director for a Masters in Soils and Sustainability, which is a collaboration across Scotland's Rural College and University of Edinburgh. And I have been with them since 2007 and running this Masters since 2012. So I'm kind of well embedded in the two organisations. I do teach from HNC through to Masters level, and the subjects I deliver in are resource recovery, remediation of degraded land and land remediation strategies, but obviously also soil science. So SRUC delivers education, but it also delivers research and consultancy. And so over the last 5 to 10 years of becoming a little bit more research active, and most of my research happens within the waste industry or linked to recovery of materials from waste. We do work in partnership with industry and stakeholders, which is why for me it's quite exciting because I get involved in kind of real world projects rather than some of the more innovative stuff. But I think I quite like working where it's actually on the ground applicable. And so it is helping industry tackle things like the wicked challenges, so things like biodiversity loss at the moment I'm quite interested in within construction soils, for example. But then also looking at things like resource depletion and how we can move industries like construction, as an example, towards circular economy. So I've been working, as I said, with SRUC since 2007. And that was really directly following my PhD, which I completed in 2007. So I moved straight into lecturing at that stage, and it was all related to waste at that point.
Right. So you've been doing so there's quite a lot of waste involved in that. So what kind of research are you doing at the moment in waste side? Because that sounds really interesting. And I think when you said about having, you know, the collaboration with industry as well, I mean, I know, you know, me and Alasdair do some lecturing on your MSc course, which I find absolutely fascinating. It's really interesting. But
Thank you very much.
you also, but you also have loads of other sort of external lecturers, don't you? And you also go for site visits and things, because I often find that you get students who know it in theory but never actually seen it in practice and don't actually really understand it.
Yeah, I think I'm quite lucky because I work with the fourth years and master students. That aspect, that practical aspect, is something that I think is so important, and so their dissertations are very, very practical. The last few years we've had students, I guess since COVID, a little bit more focused on the socioeconomic side of things rather than actually getting their hands dirty. But this year that began to change again a little bit, and I've had a student working on reuse strategies within construction waste. Okay. So thinking about construction surplus materials, what can be reused, and part of that was actually going out and doing a little bit of an overview about what wastes are being generated in general, but how much of that would be potentially recoverable. And then the student was thinking around what are the strategies for reuse, so whether that's actually on site or through localised reuse hubs. We had one really nice example within one of the organisations that we were speaking to, who was doing some reuse activities with the men's shed, the local men's shed. And it was actually really interesting. That kind of innovation, you can actually see in the data that comparative sites that were running through the same company on the same year, all of their waste was increasing over the lifetime of the project. Whereas this particular site, you can actually see declines in the amount of waste that they're sending off for treatment, because it was going into the men's sheds, or it was being sent out to some of the old folks' homes so that they can make bird boxes and get them a bit more active and do crafty things with it. So I think for me that was really interesting, because this was something that was just done on a localised basis because that particular site manager knew the area very well. But it shows that that kind of innovation is entirely possible. And then it's just thinking about, how do we manage that appropriately? What kind of on-site strategies are needed? How do we deal with the health and safety aspects of that when it's potentially people coming on site that are not part of the team? So there's a few tweaks around about that, but I think the exciting thing for the student was, I think there is the reality that reuse options are available, and it's just another step change in behaviours.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It is that step change in behaviours. And, you can see it on a localised basis. It's like, I always kind of find these refillery shops are really good, but you need about thousands of them to make a difference. And I suppose, again, it's like, if you can identify that's going to work on a local basis, how do you roll that out nationally or whatever, so that impact is, cumulative over the different construction sites or whatever. So I guess it's always going to be that side of it, isn't it?
I think it is. I mean, part of this study was looking specifically at what the barriers would be to bringing out a kind of reuse hub type scenario. And there was definite, from the industry, conversations around the financial implications, whose responsibility would it be, and where do we get the resources for that? And I think there's definitely that real willingness to think outside the box. I mean, don't get me wrong, construction have done amazing things in the last wee while. Moving to recycling, you go on site, the sites are very clean. They've got all of their recycling skips sitting out. Really, this is just a step change. And one of the things that we did note was the potential need for more digital data on what they're actually generating where. And obviously, if you're talking about reuse, one of the big things that they would need to consider is some kind of storage on site, so that you're protecting the materials that people are coming to get. So there was some real kind of infrastructure type barriers around about that as well, linked into that kind of health and safety aspect in particular, because as we all know, if you're going on and off any industrial site, you're really supposed to be absolutely covered in PPE, and if people are coming from the men's shed, I suspect that's not the case. So I think that's something to consider in future, or think about how do we get these materials off site safely and delivered to somebody, so that you're not running that risk. So there's definitely some real discussions to be had there, but I think the viability is definitely there, and it is that kind of, how do we overcome these barriers, and how do we support that industry in particular in making these step changes?
Yeah, it's the step changes, isn't it? Yeah.
The reuse stuff's really interesting, Jennifer. I was at the running club the other night, and Laura was there, and she was like, "Oh, I need to go because I need to go to pick up." They've managed to gather up loads of school uniforms.
Oh, right,
They're basically washing them, cleaning them, and putting them back out there. And I sort of chatted to her, and it's just a local group. And they said, "Oh, we meet every so often and we decide what we're doing and so on." She says, "But it really annoys me every time I turn up. It's disposable coffee cups we take. I'm going to tell them that we need to use a reusable cup." So it's really good that they're, just from starting looking at trying to gather up uniforms to give to kids when they start the term, they're starting to think more sustainably and the other things they do.
It's interesting.
It is interesting how you can drive change into
sustainability behaviors, isn't
so
it?
you could give them a load of Albion coffee cups. Donate some.
You could.
We could. I did say to her, actually, I said we did do a wee post about coffee cups last week, and she's not actually on my LinkedIn, but so I have actually just connected with her on LinkedIn, so I'll make sure she starts following Albion and the post we do, and the rubbish talk ones. So there we go.
No,
There's a
definitely.
wee plug for Albion and the
I
rubbish
know.
talk all in one there. Well done. As if we
No, it is
it's as
really
if we planned this.
So I've had a few students in the past have done studies around about their recycling behaviours, but looking at if they're recycling effectively, are they doing other or evidencing other sustainability measures like cycling to work and stuff like that. And it was really interesting that there is a real correlation between people that are behaving in that kind of manner, thinking about the recycling, doing it effectively, and how they're demonstrating that in other aspects of their life. I don't know if that does come down to the demographics, because if you think about people and their willingness to recycle, it does come down to what other pressures they've got in their life, what other responsibilities that they have. And if they don't have time to recycle, then it is presumably because they also have a million other things to be doing in their life. So do they have the time to make these changes in behaviour to allow them to think about cycling to work? And it all comes down to everyone's personal circumstances, and that's the real issue behind, I think, behaviour change, because everybody is so different in what their standards are, what their expectations are, how much time and resources they've got available, whether that's a commercial industry or just your individual person. And that then determines how quickly we can make these behaviour changes. And I do think it's interesting with all of the talks around about climate change, the pace that some of these changes are now happening, because people do have much more awareness and schools are really talking about sustainability within their curriculum plans. So I really feel that there is much more momentum now. If you compare where we were about 20 years ago, I think the pace of movement is much faster.
I certainly find when I come across and lecture for you, Jennifer, your class is particularly sort of active and knowledgeable in the subject, and I think that's partly because I think they can do it as an elective as well, so they can
Yes.
see it as so quite often it's a huge array of students from different backgrounds that have all come together to do
Yes.
that one elective, which makes it a really interesting mix to lecture to, because it's actually quite challenging. It's quite they will challenge and they will ask you to explain things and justify things, and
they do like to ask you questions that are a bit of a curveball.
Yeah.
Well, half of them are sitting there as economists, and I'm not an economist.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because there are so many different, and people are asking different questions from different sides of the sort of ball, I suppose.
Yes. I think that's, and for me, because we've got so many different countries in one room, we have been exploring that a little bit more this year. So we've done a few activities where it's more discursive in class. And it's really interesting looking at the different policies and strategies across the different countries and why they're more applicable there in comparison to what we're doing in the UK. And vice versa, where they're sitting there going, actually, that is a really good idea. That's something I can take home with me. So it really gives value to the classes, I think, having this real mix. And these different perspectives. It's like you say, it's a bit of a juggling act and managing the class sometimes, and it can get a little bit heated sometimes as well. But I think there's some real great conversations coming out this year. The group's good. You're going to enjoy it this year.
Looking forward to it. Yeah. Looking forward to it. So you mentioned your PhD was your route into waste management. Was that always your plan, or was it a slight curveball?
So, this for me was a real curveball. So in fact, I've had 2 or 3 through my education. And I think if there was any message I give any student is what you plan when you're like 14 years old and you're like, I'm going to be a vet, probably is not going to happen.
What did you plan then?
So originally I went to university to study zoology because I had it in my head that I was going to go into conservation and look after some amazingly exotic, endangered wild species, like the tiger, for example. And then I got about halfway through my course at Dundee and realised that I'm actually much better at plant and soil sciences and some of the kind of the more hard science, I guess, in terms of like soil chemistry and things like that. So, which completely baffled me because these are subjects I was terrible at high school, but for some reason excelled at university. So by the end of my course, I'd swapped to ecology, and I was really lucky that at the end of my course, I did my dissertation in collaboration with the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And my supervisors, after I finished, wrote a PhD and asked me to go to interview with everybody else, which I did. And I won the PhD. So about a year later, I was running about a peat bog in the middle of Scotland, looking at plant ecophysiology. So it was all to do with atmospheric nitrogen deposition and how that impacts the plant species in a peat bog, and tying it into the changes in the peat nutrition and that kind of idea. So from there, I spent a couple of years in the background doing part-time work in finance, because my father was the director, or involved with the Scottish Building Society, let's put it that way. And I thought, well, if Daddy did it, perhaps that's the direction I should be looking in. And after 2 years went, no, that's just not right. So I applied for a maternity cover with SRUC, and so did that for about 9 months and was made permanent. So,
You're not our first guest that has done maternity cover and ended
yeah.
ended up in a full job.
But the thing is, so I was covering waste management and pollution control at the time because of that link with the pollution and the impacts on the peat bog. And by the end of the 9 months, I was absolutely hooked in this kind of really fast-paced changes in the industry and policy, really absorbed. And I think waste is just so emotive that everybody is really engaged with it, and you can have real conversations. And so, yeah, for me, it was a bit of a change in direction. But actually, by the end of my degree, I was asked the question, what would you like to do? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And at that stage, I said I would like to lecture. So I knew that my pathway had changed and lecturing was an area that I wanted to go into. But I could not have predicted that it would have been any way, shape, form related to waste management.
Well, that's a good one.
I like that. I like that. Any particular favourite roles or projects you did in that earlier part of career, or any part of your career?
I guess I have been teaching the masters that I'm teaching now, so the one that you two feed into, since I think I started in 2009. And I have clung on to this module because it is my absolute favourite to deliver. We have some really engaging conversations, and as I said earlier, the diversity of students just make the module. And I really get to explore with them the changes in policy. So where have we come from? Where are we now? Where are we going to be in 5-10 years' time? Was a question I asked them just last week, in fact. So really love that module. And I think I'm very much enjoying the role that I'm playing at the moment in research, where I am working with the construction industry. I'm looking at circular economy readiness, and I'm exploring what that looks like from a rural perspective. So really trying to get a grasp on how ready are they and what are the barriers that they're facing if they're on a small island in comparison to an organisation that's on the suburbs of Glasgow. So I think for me that's really rewarding, because I'm passing on information that I feel is going to inform some of these changes moving forward, and is hopefully helping the industry in these more remote locations.
That's interesting. I don't know whether it's easier
sounds
or more
great.
difficult on an island. At least with an island, you've got, you are confined, aren't you? So you kind of need to manage and deal with it on island. I think they're used to doing that as well, to some extent.
Well, it depends on the island. So there's been a couple that I'm working on that are still reliant on waste coming off on the ferry, and then they've got huge implications if the ferries are off over the winter period and waste's accumulating. You've got Christmas, all of that food waste sitting there potentially for 4, 5, 6 weeks in a small transfer station. So there are some really nice examples like Shetland, where you've got your energy from waste facility, and of course that was massively innovative and exactly what the island needed. But you've got some of the smaller islands again that just don't have this capacity yet. And they are trying. They've been looking at alternative options, but it comes down to the potential funding that's available, and at the moment that the reality is it's not there. So a lot of these islands end up with exemptions. So there is some innovation happening on islands. So composting's quite a big thing, community composting. But there's still a lot of food waste sitting about and having to be dealt with, for example.
No, that's true, actually, I guess. So what about you? Have you had any real disasters, any worst projects, any funny stories you've got that you can share, Jennifer?
Actually, I was thinking about this the other day. Not a disaster. I think the hardest project that I've been working on is we've been doing a food waste audit on one of the islands, and the guys working at the transfer station have been absolutely amazing. We asked them for household waste and they brought us 29 bins that we worked through, and we were really just doing a proportion analysis of how much of that was food waste versus just general waste, because it all goes into a black bin. So we were trying to really kind of get a grasp on this, and so we did the food waste audit over the course of a day. It wasn't too bad. There were some interesting things sneaking in there because it's an island. They've got an awful lot of Airbnbs, and so at the end of the Airbnb tenancy, they're throwing away things like full cartons of Philadelphia, presumably things that they've bought that they were going to use while they're on holiday and haven't done. So that was quite interesting, but the harder part was when they brought in the commercial waste, and the boys very kindly went out to the butchers and collected the butcher waste.
Oh, lovely.
So the two of us are standing wailing through this waste. I have never felt so sick in my life. I mean, like the word gagging is absolutely bang on the button, because we kept having to walk out of the sorting station so that we could get the fresh air. And we were taking it in turns, so about every 10 minutes, one of us was walking out and coming back in again. And that was so hard. And it wasn't what you would imagine. There wasn't any kind of evidence of bugs and beasties. So it was just genuinely the smell of rotting meat. And that was very good. And I'm sure they did that on purpose as a bit of a giggle.
I say, I always find when we're doing waste composition analysis, the worst smell is chicken. That's gone off chicken. Oh, that is just foul.
Actually, takeaways in the household waste was pretty interesting.
Did you see my joke there? That was foul. Sorry.
It was foul. Oh no!
Sorry, I missed that one, Jane.
I missed it until I fell. Anyway, sorry about that.
So thinking about your role, Jennifer, do you think you've changed your opinions and habits out with the workplace? And if so, how do we do that? We've talked about engagement bit, about the reuse, but how do we get that wider engagement bit with the wider public?
It's definitely, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the more I've got involved in this, the more you think about what you're doing in your own day-to-day life. It would be a little bit ironic if I was teaching a course in sustainability and hadn't done that. I would say that education and raising awareness is the absolute way to go with this. I think the more people understand the implications of it, and not frightening them, but actually just giving them the reasons. Why is this going to be better for you in the long run? I think that is definitely the way forward. And then if you can tackle one area like waste management, increased recycling, as I discussed earlier, some of these linked behaviours do start coming in, because we were talking about coffee cups. If you're recycling at home and then you're going to a cafe every day and you're thinking, goodness, I'm throwing away a cup on a daily basis at least, then that is something that people kind of cascade and start thinking about a bit more. So I definitely think that kind of raising awareness and education, which, as we've talked about, is happening through schools anyway. But I also think some of the incentives that are coming in at the moment are really a benefit in terms of driving public behaviours. So things like the deposit return system that we're trying to bring in, I think in the long run that'll have quite positive implications. I can absolutely sympathise with the initial teething issues around about it. But we were there with the batteries directive. It was exactly the same kind of teething issues at that point. So these eventually will be overcome, and I think that's going to be a really nice incentive. And then I think similarly we're seeing some of these coming in around about coffee cups, where you're getting discounts if you're using a reusable cup. So I think some of these, and it's that cascade, because then you're thinking, well, if I'm getting a discount for my cup, what if I used a reusable package to go to the supermarket and a refill station? So I think over time, these are the things that are going to change behaviours.
Do you know the coffee cup thing? I was just going to say the coffee cup thing's interesting, because what I found is I don't think my coffee cup is that big, but sometimes you go to the places and you can't actually shove them under. You have to shove them under the thing and press a button, and the tea comes out or the coffee comes out or whatever. So I've actually had to found that, because my mug doesn't fit under those things have actually got to use a reusable
They
one
use
and then put it in.
they use a
Yeah, it's
disposable ones.
really, really annoying. So I think design-wise, there's a design flaw there.
You need
I
to start
think-
using the Albion mug, Jane, because it fits.
I know you.
Yeah, yes.
You need to get on message and use an Albion
Yeah,
mug.
I do, but
I think
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
definitely options out there, though. I have to say, I've done that. So that's exactly, we have this at the cafe at work, and all of my reusable thermal cups are now the same size as a normal coffee cup, so that I can get them filled up and take them out. So when I'm out with my students, I've got my latte while I'm standing in the middle of a peat bog, or just before we go onto a landfill site.
I was gonna say there, Jennifer. My daughter has just discovered the Lidl in Glasgow had obviously invested in DRS equipment and so on. So they're doing
Yes.
a trial run of 5 pence back for a bottle if you take it back to Lidl.
Ah,
So she's
amazing.
discovered that she gathers up the plastic bottles in her flat. She can get some free cakes or whatever she wants out of Lidl. So
That's definitely, it is an incentive, it really is.
yeah, it does show you. It does show you.
I mean, I do remember when I was a child, Bon Accord was about, and you got your 20 pence back for your glass bottles, and I do remember going around all the neighbours and collecting all the bottles and getting my £1.50 so I could get my little bag of sweeties for the week.
It was the Bar's Iron Brew ones, and I remember vividly we've managed to find a whole stash in a burn. But some of them were not the cleanest. And the poor shop owner was not the happiest.
Like, I've still got to give you your
Lovely.
money.
Armfuls of dirty bottles for him to give us our 20 pence back.
Bless them.
Anyway, so you've obviously got a busy role at the university. How do you get away? How do you relax and get away from the work?
So I do quite a bit of travelling. So there's a little bit of a story behind this. I was in hospital when I was 21 and had my large intestine removed, and the survival chances were not the best at the time, but I did, obviously. And when I came out, I decided that I wanted to go on an annual holiday abroad, like an exploration, so somewhere new every time. And I wanted to explore Scotland because you never visit what's on your doorstep. So that's exactly what I've done for the last 20 odd years now. I'm not going to say exactly how many. But it is really nice. So we've now visited all of the Canary Islands, even the small ones. And I've been to Latin America and Thailand, and we have explored a lot of Scotland. So we're actually up at Stonehaven this weekend for a little bit of a long weekend to explore some of the woodlands around about there. So yeah, so we take some downtime.
There's a good chip shop in.
And you've got to tell us about Morocco.
Oh, there's a good chip shop in Stonehaven.
Yes.
Just to butt in there, you know.
I know, Jane. Actually, funnily enough, that's where we're going on Friday night because we're not going to get up till quite late on. So I thought, if we could just get a wee poke of chips and sit at the harbour. Hopefully, it's not raining. Fingers crossed.
And there'll be no food waste.
No, absolutely not. So actually, my family are really, really traditional, and my mum would not let me leave the table if I still had food on my dish. So I
I'm
always
still like that. I get all antsy if there's food left on the table.
Yeah,
I get
no,
all,
you do.
yeah.
I have to eat it. That's the trouble.
Although thankfully my husband was a bit of a gamut. And the thing is, I'm trying to lose weight, and it's impossible if you get a chippy. Portion sizes now are so huge, and I feel like I can't leave the food waste. And I'm like, I'm never going to lose weight
Yeah.
at this rate.
I know that feeling.
There was a really nice, actually, thinking about food waste example in Brazil, and it was one of these all-you-can-eat buffets, which are renowned for food waste at the end because everybody takes more than, like, your eyes are bigger than your stomach kind of idea. But they got around this there by you paid an additional charge for however much food waste you had left over. So you had your set menu, like, cost, and then you had to weigh your plate and your food waste at the end, and they then calculated the charge so that you were paying for your food waste. I thought that's
That's a
clever.
good
That's
idea.
fantastic.
Yeah, so you need
everywhere.
a bin in the middle of the table, and you put it all there, and you get charged. That's a great idea, Jennifer.
Exactly, and it's doing some of the job for the restaurant as well because it's already bagged and binned, and you're covering their costs for the food waste. So it's a win-win, and it makes people cut down their portion
That is a
size,
good
hopefully.
idea.
But no, you mentioned Morocco, Alasdair.
Yes.
So we were taking students through the Environmental Protection and Management and Soils and Sustainability Masters to Morocco. And I've been doing that with them right the way through to about 3 years ago, Alasdair, and now the soil students go to Portugal. So I'm taking them slightly different location.
Different part of the world.
Yes, but it's just nice to see the different locations, the different strategies. In Morocco, we did a really interesting study one year around about. So this is in Imlil, which is up in the mountains, in the Atlas Mountains, and it's really popular for the hiking because we're right at the base of Toubkal. And so we did a survey around about waste management, and it was more about littering. And so we asked the tourists who they thought were generating the most amount of litter. And all of the tourists said it was the locals. They were absolutely terrible. They were chucking waste willy-nilly. And then when we asked the locals, of course, they were saying it was the tourists. And these tourists are absolutely terrible. They're throwing litter everywhere. It was a really interesting study. And at the end of it, the students were like, actually, it's probably both.
Both
But
of you.
what they don't have is, there's no bins on streets or anything like that. So there's not a local kind of bin collection system. So I think the strategy needs to be looked at because the number of tourists coming into that area is increasing every year, which is wonderful because it's bringing in money, it's bringing in resources. But then equally, we need to be thinking about how's that being managed. So that was essentially the outcome of that study. But the students thought it was hilarious. And some of the quotes that they were getting from the locals about the tourists and vice versa were quite interesting and not repeatable.
So what about your current role? We were talking about the MSc that you do. What are you looking to achieve? What's next for you? I'm going to ask you the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I mean, to be honest, I see myself doing exactly what I'm doing right now in 5 years' time. I'm absolutely loving the balance that I now have between my research activities and teaching the master's students. I do have PhD students as well, and so they're quite varied. Some of them are coming in. I've got a student starting this year looking at ground-dwelling bumblebees and solitary bees, and looking at land management strategies and how that impacts the populations and what sites they're using and stuff like that. So kind of tying into regenerative agriculture. But then I've got 2 students at the moment at PhD level working on contaminated lands and looking at soil remediation strategies with a focus on using plants to remediate the sites. And one of those is linked into waste because the initial conversation was around about waste soils and what do we do with waste soils when landfills close, particularly those that are slightly contaminated. And the idea behind her project was we have a large number of brownfield sites like the old mine, coal mining. So can we be spreading these out over these sites and then using biomass crops to remediate the soil? And that means that over the time period of the remediation, the landowner's getting the money back from the biomass, but then you've got decontaminated soil at the end of it that can potentially be used on their sites or sold and reused somewhere else if it meets the British standard requirements. So it's quite an innovative project. She has been looking at a range of crop species. So she's been looking at willow as one of the examples that we know deals quite well with contamination. But she's also been looking at some crop species and some green manures and looking at their phytoremediation capacity as well. So it was really just kind of an exploration as to whether this might be a potential option for some of the waste soils as we get to the point that we have to divert from landfill.
That's really interesting, actually, and I think that's because we've been dealing with a couple of sites. One that we're looking to put willow on as a biomass crop, but also it's going to be on a landfill site, and in another landfill site we've got which has been abandoned, and how to manage the contaminated, the leachate and whatever. Can you use plants and that kind of stuff to remediate the leachate, and how can you do it? And it's been quite interesting actually, looking at what plants can actually do, which fascinates me because they can actually do a lot more than you think. I mean, I don't know how it works because the plants in my garden keep dying, and I feed them and they've got nice soils and all sorts of stuff. Whereas you can put a load of plants on leachate and there they go, absolutely thriving. So I don't quite know what I'm doing wrong. But anyway,
Maybe you should try the plants that are on the landfill site in the
yeah,
garden.
I think I just need ones that you can just stick in and leave. So what about, is there any,
Yes, no, I'm the same.
I'm just rubbish. Is there any fact you want to share from your job or sector that you think people might not know? And there's been a few already, but is there anything specific? Do you have any facts at your fingertips?
Waste facts, no. Tons about soil.
Well, soil's fine. We can do
Give
file.
us
We can
one
do
about soil then. Go for soil. We like soil.
So actually, there's the conversation around the biodiversity in soil and the fact that the biodiversity in soil is so much greater than even in our oceans. And if we don't know what's in our oceans, we definitely don't know what's in the soil. And that then, it kind of ties into this concept of remediation and biodiversity crisis, because how can we protect species if we don't know they're there in the first place? And that whole conversation around remediation strategy, thinking about food webs, supporting food webs, managing soil health. And again, if we don't actually fully understand how a food web is functioning, how do we know that it's not working? How do we know that there's changes? So I think for me, that's that kind of conversation, that fact about there being more biodiversity in soils than in the oceans is really interesting.
Yeah.
I like that
one
one.
as well.
That goes back to one of my favourite quotes that Jenny Grant from RIA gave me. Despite all our accomplishments, I can't even say that word, can I? We owe our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains.
Yes, absolutely agree with that 100%.
Did you notice, just talking about soil, did you notice the recent Environmental Standards Scotland's report about it?
No.
They've just released the risk to Scotland's soils, a scoping report, and they're basically saying that we need to do much better at not degrading the nation's soil.
Yeah, I think so. I've been involved in a lot of conversations just recently with some of our consultants, and they're exploring changes that are needed in the new Scottish Soils Framework. And so that's been really interesting because they're covering all kind of land use sectors, and I came into the urban soils discussion. And I think renewing focus on contaminated soils and urban soils is something that needs to be considered, because in the last soils framework, it wasn't covered because it was covered in the land use strategy. Whereas I think now there's much more of a consensus and agreement that actually embedding this within the soils framework is needed. And that is with a view to activities like waste management construction, where you do have quite significant amounts of soil erosion as a consequence. And just thinking about how can we manage and handle soils better. And probably part of that comes down to governance as well. So not just providing the guidance, but making sure that, as with any of the guidance that were provided, that people are actually following it.
I think we're very good at providing guidance, aren't we? And strategies and policies, but it's actually implementing them we have a bit of an issue with.
Yeah. I think we've seen that kind of historically, and I think we've always got the right idea in Scotland with the strategies, and the targets that we're setting are reasonable. I think quite often we need to consider the timelines better for what that means for people on the ground, and that's definitely one of the barriers that I've kind of been discussing with the waste transfer stations and the construction industry, is they quite often get hit by kind of 5-year targets and deadlines that actually on the ground for some of the sites is just not feasible, it's not possible, and it puts quite a lot of pressure on them, and then they feel disappointed that they're not able to deliver what everybody else is delivering, but it's down to funding and resources and capability, and it's a difficult conversation sometimes, and particularly with the construction industry, because they've got such a run-in and a lead-in time to projects, so that by the time something's approved, if policy changes, they're kind of already tied into contracts, so it means they can't make these changes. So there is definitely some difficulties around about how that is being delivered, but I think the strategies that we have are definitely reasonable and everybody's behind them.
Some of the technology that's available to particularly the agricultural sector now is incredible. I was up seeing Charles Gray composting up at Port Soy, and he was saying that his application of it, because he uses compost, so he matches the compost. He tests the land, he tests the nutritional value of the compost, and then he works out where the gap is in terms of the artificial application. But they literally program their tractors. The tractor could drive around the field itself, and it'll apply different amounts of compost and different amounts of fertilizer around that field, depending on what's needed. So the technology is just incredible that we've got. That we should be able to look after we've got the technology now to look after, even with quite intensive agriculture, to actually look after it. So,
No, I definitely agree. And I think that's one of my areas of interest, I guess, moving forward. So I'm about to start, hopefully, fingers crossed, a project with the whisky industry looking at the potential for biochar of their waste products and using that to support the growth and yield and health of barley. And for me, that kind of, it's the epitome of where I want to be in 5-10 years' time, is looking at how can we view waste that we have now differently? How can we be reducing the amount of outputs from all of these different processes so that we are kind of much more circular in what we're doing? And technology is really at the heart of this, because we need the technology and the innovation to be able to come up with these new ideas, new strategies, new products, essentially. So I think for me, the next 5-10 years are going to be just as engaging as the last 5-10 years.
Just as exciting, eh?
Exactly. I mean, you've got all these new technologies coming in. You've got artificial intelligence coming into the sector. The potential for change is massive. And I think the next 5-10 years are going to be quite rapid in the amount of change that we're seeing as a consequence.
Here's a total curveball question for you, Jennifer, that we've not asked you before, but I'm sure you'll be able to give me an answer. As a lecturer and an academic, how are you coping with the increase in ChatGPT type technologies for students putting work in?
Yeah, no, actually, so we're engaging with it, and most institutes are quite positively, because, of course, a student, you can give them an essay question and they can go away, they can
stick in,
they can send you an answer back. But the reality is, if they do that, quite often the quality of the work isn't there, because in all honesty, some of these AIs are still pulling off of things like Wikipedia, or they're using resources that are not correct, and they're fabricating references as well still. So they're just not at the stage that what they're submitting might be passable, but it's like a bare pass in comparison. Yeah. But it's also blatantly obvious in terms of we've identified previous writing styles or how they deliver materials in class, and then suddenly their writing style change. So it's a bit of a giveaway. So there's definitely tells, but actually engaging with them and saying, right, okay, go away and do this on purpose, but then come back and you're going to critique what this GPT has given you, means that they're still thinking about the subject matter. They're thinking about, how would I have written this essay? What would I have included? Are these real references? Is this the best source? So actually getting them to do a critique of an essay from a GPT is still getting them to cover the same learning outcomes, but it's also raising awareness of why ChatGPT is not necessarily the best thing.
That's good, actually. I like that.
No, I like that. We've certainly we've started using it, and we use it very much on that basis. We use it very much to give us a start, and then
Yes.
give us the headings, and then it's more a sense check. Is that heading correct? Does that make sense? Is it the right information? And in terms of a time saver, I think it is a really good time saver, because it gives you that bare bones of a
gives you a starter for 10, isn't it?
I mean,
sometimes you can sit there and think, what am I going to write? And
that's precisely what it is. But I think it is having that caution. So we say to our students, do not use Wikipedia as a reference source, because my gran could write something on Wikipedia. It's not peer reviewed, and it would just sit there, and you would think that that's correct information because it's sitting in Wikipedia, it's public. And it's the same with the Chat GPT. It's pulling information from so many different sites, And it really is sense checking it and making sure. So as a starter for 10, absolutely, if it's concepts that you don't really understand or know, that's great. Use it to get that kind of background concept. But I would definitely say to students to avoid using it as kind of like an actual thing that they're going to start working from and submitting. Definitely do it yourself, just so you've got confidence in what you're submitting, because at the end of the day, you do get caught out. We've had a few academic misconducts linked into this when it first became quite available. And thankfully, the students are really engaging with it. And we've also moved a lot of our assessments, so it's a lot harder to use ChatGPT as well. So if you're basing it on case studies and soil analysis that you've done on site, or analysis of wastes, and you can't really use that because you're talking about your own data. So yeah, I think it's making us think a little bit more outside the box in terms of what we're delivering. But in all honesty, the academic sector had done this anyway because of COVID. So a lot of the ways that we were assessing and delivering have, in the space of 2 or 3 years, become much more participatory. Student engagement and conversations and discussions became very, very popular in actually assessing how they're delivering that, which means they can't be using ChatGPT because it's very much down to their own understanding. So I definitely think that there's absolute benefits to having ChatGPT there, and engaging with it, but I think it's engaging with it and getting students to engage with it properly.
I think that's true, because you can't.
There we go. There was
You can't. It's there, isn't it? You know, you can't pretend it isn't.
Yes. Oh, it's not going to go away.
People are going to use it if it's there.
No.
I use it. I use it quite often. Like if people use Grammarly, I quite often put a few words in and ask it to tidy it up for me.
Oh, right, okay.
Reword this or
And it's
something.
actually it's generally quite effective at doing that. You know, I just ask it to tidy it up, and it makes it sound a bit better than the rubbish I've written.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that possibly students are going to start doing a lot more, and especially, like, I myself am dyslexic, so occasionally it's quite nice. Historically, I would have kind of done this for my students. It's actually quite nice when I give them a piece of work back with comments and feedback, and they've obviously gone away taking that on board, but they've also been looking and proofreading and using these to enhance the way that they're writing, the style that they're writing. And as you're doing that, you are learning yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. We sidetracked down ChatGPT. You weren't expecting that question, were you? So my next question for you, and you've used one you mentioned, so your favourite piece of slang or dialect that you find yourself using every day, and you mentioned a wee poke of chips, so the people down south that don't know what a poke of chips is, a bag of chips.
So a poke of chips, but actually in class, I usually, when I'm talking about the organisms in the soil or organisms in compost, I do talk about bugs and beasties, which I think is probably, it is very, especially beasties, it's very, very Scottish.
That's a very academic term, Jennifer.
Bugs and beasties.
Bugs and beasties, I know, but it gets, the students giggle and the international students find it kind of interesting and enjoy having that little bit of kind of a more local use of words, but they're understanding it obviously because I've said bugs first, so they know what I'm talking about. So yes, I think every now and again these little things creep in, and I forget how Scottish I am sometimes.
Until you hear yourself.
I know, yeah, or somebody raises it and I think, oh goodness, I didn't realise that was a Scottish word.
Yeah. And anyway, no, I like that one. So I'm going to give you a magic wand to sort something out in the big bad world of waste management. What would you like to use it for?
Okay,
What's
so
your big ask?
I've got 2 responses to this. So for me,
I'm not sure you're allowed to, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well, so one's from me and one's from my students.
Oh, no, there's a copyright there.
Yeah. So I guess food waste for me, I feel we've got biodegradable municipal waste ban coming in, and commercial waste, food waste in particular, we're absolutely fine with. But I think there's still an issue around about household waste because currently it's voluntary and a lot of people are just not doing it and it ends up in the general waste. So I think for me, that as an area to target, and particularly given the awareness around about how much of the carbon emissions are coming specifically from that source. So for me, I think that's definitely an area of focus. And I would love in 5-10 years' time for that to be fully addressed and for people to be comfortable recycling and composting their food waste and that being a norm like it was after the war. From the student perspective, I asked the question this week, where do you think we need to focus our policies and strategies over the next 5-10 years? And I'd separated them into 6 groups and gave them about 10 minutes to discuss this within their group. And it was based around their awareness of social behaviours, pressures on raw materials. And so 4 out of the 6 groups came back with lithium batteries as the area that we need to place focus. And there was a discussion around about the fact that it does use so many raw materials and that the recycling process is difficult, it's not necessarily local, and linked into the social behaviours with everybody having mobiles, iPads, laptops that are running on lithium batteries, but obviously tying into electric cars and enhanced renewable energy requiring potential storage moving forward. So there was some real discussion around about batteries. And then interestingly, the other 2 groups, one of them wanted to place continued focus on plastics and thinking about how do we continue our momentum in that area and looking at recycling with the chemical recycling. Some of them had done a little bit of background research around about some of these chemical recycling processes. But then we did have the discussion around about how much of a benefit is this if we're trying to continue towards less plastics, less raw materials. Actually, reuse is a better strategy rather than saying just use whatever plastics you want because we can recycle it. So that was an interesting conversation. And then the final group were waste electronics. So kind of tied into the lithium battery kind of concept, but again, thinking about this technology, the enhancement technology that everybody now has got a laptop and a mobile phone, and there's 2 cars sitting outside the house, and everybody's got the most fancy and up-to-date fridge freezers with their ice buckets and whatever else, and they only last 3 to 5 years, and then suddenly you're having to buy a new one, which is cheaper than getting the old one fixed. So yeah, there's some real conversations coming out. So it was interesting. 4 groups out of 6, lithium batteries.
Interesting.
There we go. Well, it's certainly your food waste one. You'll probably have heard myself and Jane ranting about that. To me, it's a really obvious low-hanging fruit.
Yep.
20% of the population use it, 80% aren't.
Yep.
To me, it's so basic.
I absolutely agree. Yeah,
we've not done it.
We essentially, we've got the infrastructure there because they're out, they're collecting bins.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
increasing the public participation.
Absolutely. The lithium batteries is interested that 4 groups came back with that. Actually, that's probably quite high actually. But it is, we've talked about this before. There's multi-billion pounds worth of research going into battery technology.
Yeah.
There's probably only thousands of pounds of research going into battery recycling.
Exactly.
And it strikes you as absolute madness that we're not actually, it's not a waste industry problem. It's a society problem, and we need to start investing in it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think the students were bang on the button. I think for me, food waste is something that we should be able to tackle in the next 2 to 3 years because we have everything we need in place for that. But they're quite right that over the next 5 to 10 years, the pressure that's going to come from the amount of batteries we're generating, waste batteries, is going to be very similar to the situation we're in with tyres and the number of tyres that we're generating. And we don't want to end up with tons and tons of waste that we can't do anything with.
Yeah. No.
Absolutely.
So finally, Jennifer, you're in as good a position as anybody here. What advice would you like to give to the younger generation, or what advice do you give them, all your students coming into the sector? How do you persuade them that waste management is the right industry to be in?
So actually, I don't really need to persuade them because by the time they've done the 2-3 year undergraduate course and gone through those modules, those that are genuinely interested in the waste industry it's quite evident quite quickly that they are. And we do get high proportion of our students coming through at fourth year that are doing something related to waste management. So I don't really need to persuade anybody to come into this. And I think it goes back to that initial comment that I made, that waste is quite emotive and everybody's involved in it. So it is an area that people are interested in, and there's that direct link into net zero and into climate change. And so I think from that perspective, everybody's invested. And by the time I get them in my master's class, the whole group of students, as you said, Alasdair, it's elective for all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I have 33 students this year that are taking resource recovery and circular economy. That's 33 students that are sitting there because they want to learn about what's happening, what are the strategies, what are the technologies in the UK, how can I use these, how can I get involved in consultancy. So there's essentially, they're chasing me. In my first week, I had about a third of the class coming up asking for internships and placements and dissertation support. So I don't think, from that perspective, I really don't have any advice in terms of getting involved in the waste industry, because I think the passion and the enthusiasm for it is already there.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, for anybody coming through education, there's always a question as they come through their studies: what level do I need to go to get into the place that I want within the waste industry or any industry? And my advice is always to sit down and keep going through all the job adverts, find out what jobs are you interested in and what do they need for you to have to be able to go in and interview. So that then informs you whether you need a degree, whether you need the master's, whether you need to go to PhD if you're involved in more of the research and innovation side of things. And this was actually advice that my dad gave to me when I was younger, because I'd come through my undergraduate and I'd kind of come out of hospital and I was sitting there thinking, I don't really know what to do next. And that was exactly what he said to me. He said, well, look in the jobs, look in the papers, look at the end of New Scientist at the jobs there. What is it that you're really interested in, and what are the adverts telling you that you need to be able to get those jobs? And so that told me that I needed to get my PhD. And then from there, it really was just a bit of a curveball where you end up. I think my other bit of advice would be, don't panic if you end up in a situation or working in an area that you didn't think you were going to be. Because everything happens for a reason, and it's amazing the number of people that I speak to, even now, that are at my level, that have imposter syndrome, and they're sitting there thinking, why on earth am I doing this? Why have I got this role? Why have I got this responsibility? And it's actually just recognising that you're there for a reason. You've got the experience, you've got the skills, have the confidence and own it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, I think that's good.
That's perfect, Jennifer. Perfect. And I think just one final question for me. I believe we have some of your students coming to the Resourcing Scotland conference to interrogate me, I think.
Absolutely.
I've not quite been told what's happening yet, but...
Oh, okay. Well, the students know. So actually, they're all involved in arranging some of the questions that you're going to get asked and helping facilitate some of the arrangements on the day. So yeah, we've got 3 of the master's students are coming that were very kindly given tickets to attend. They won it in kind of like a prize draw.
Yeah.
But I think there's some of the others that are coming with me that are paying the registration fee as well. So we should have a small group coming from SRUC.
Good,
and they are definitely prepped with questions.
And obviously they've all...
Well, the free tickets they got were sponsorship by Albion and Resource Management Association Scotland.
Amazing.
So there's a neat fit for you. It was our sponsorship that let them come. And I think
there's
students coming from UWS as well, I think. So there'll be more than yourselves represented.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, no, that is amazing, and the students are so excited.
Have they listened to the rubbish talk, Jennifer? So they've got an idea of the, questions they can ask Alasdair. What about his magic wand? The trouble is, if you ask about it, about him relaxing, getting away from work, you'll never stop him talking about running up mountains. So anyway.
That'd be the best question, Jennifer. Just get them to ask her about running or hills or something. That'll take up the
Yeah,
afternoon.
it'd be sorted.
Oh, that's so funny. No, I think they're really, really excited about being able to attend. So I think, and they might give you some trickier questions, Alasdair. So
Yeah, I'm hoping I'm
given
going to
that
get
they're-
to see these questions before
I know,
the
well,
day.
some of them are international, so the questions are going to be kind of around about what are we doing in the UK and how might that relate to a more kind of international situation, for example.
Yeah, I'd be quite
Yeah,
happy
you
doing
just
that.
have to start
fine.
Yeah, no, I
revising.
think so. I think I don't. I'm not aware of any questions that are going to be a curveball for you, really.
That's good. That's what I like to hear. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, Jennifer. That was much
Yep,
appreciated.
and
No, thank you very much, and I will see you both in a few weeks' time.